Hi everyone, welcome to the Future Scanning Transportation presentation. This presentation is brought to you by Meredith Richard and Mary Catherine Sestrone. From walking on foot, utilizing animals, sailing the high seas, the first steam locomotive to aircraft, our species have evolved, and with it, so has our transportation. It is hard to imagine a time in which an 8-hour trip to your favorite city could take weeks on horseback and months by foot. Join us as we dive into the periods of transportation from prehistory to the present and look into the future. Here is a layout of the screencast. We will discuss the history of transportation in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. We will also discuss 4 different types of transportation: automobiles, ships, trains, and airplanes. In addition, we will talk about the past, present, and future of each type of transportation. First, we are going to discuss the history of transportation. We will discuss ancient transportation from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. The first method of transportation was walking. Can you imagine walking everywhere that you needed to go? In 4000 BC, horses became domesticated. To get from place to place, only a limited number of individuals would hop on a horse. Around 3500 BC, the wheel was invented in Mesopotamia, which is the present-day Iraq. A disc was cut from the trunk of a tree and a hole was made in the center. That disc became the first wheel. It was not used for transportation, but it paved the way for people to begin using wheels for transportation. The wheel forever changed the way that people would begin to travel, how goods would begin to be transported, and how migrations would take place. In 3100 BC, the sailboat was invented. Interestingly, in 3000 BC, camels became domesticated. 17th century transportation. In 1600, goods began being transported by pack horse as well as by ships. Ships were still testing the waters, so they were only used in certain locations at that point. Next came the submarine. It was invented in 1620 by Cornelius Drebbel. By 1662, Blaise Pascal had invented the first public bus. It was horse-drawn, had a route and specific schedule, and required a fee to ride. In 1774, James Watt built the first stationary steam engine. He worked on improving the design over the next several years. In 1783, the hot air balloon and hydrogen balloon were invented. The hot air balloon was invented by 2 brothers, Joseph Michael and Jacques Etienne in France. The balloon rose to a height around 500 feet and then landed about 25 minutes later. John Fitch was the inventor of the first steamboat. He was finally granted his first U.S. patent on August 26, 1791. He went on to create 4 different steamboats between 1785 and 1796. In 1787, the first steamboat successfully navigated the Delaware River. In 1798, the first above-ground railway opened in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England. They named it the Lake Lock Railroad. They primarily used this railway to transport coal with horse-powered wagons. Moving on to the 19th century, we see improvements in the railways and also cars. In 1801, Richard Trevithick invented the first steam-powered locomotive. The first passenger railway opened in 1812. It was located in England on the Middleton Railway. In 1863, the first underground railway started working in London. In 1867, the motorcycle was invented, followed by the cable car in 1871. In 1885, Carl Benz, the founder of Mercedes-Benz, patented the first car that was powered by an internal combustion engine. Although the car had only 3 wheels, it helped pave the way to the cars that we have now. The four-wheeled car was introduced in 1889 by Daimler and Maybach. The 20th century brought many more advancements. In 1903, the first human flight was made by the Wright brothers. Several years later, in 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T, and William Durant founded General Motors. This will be discussed more in the following slide. In 1909, Alice Ramsey became the first woman to drive across the USA in a car. The following year, Henri Fabre flew the first successful plane. After a failed attempt in 1907, the modern-day helicopter was successfully invented in 1940. 30 years later, the first jumbo jet flies. The next few slides, we will be discussing the history of ships, automobiles, trains, and planes. These are some of the main ways of transportation. The first automobile was invented in the late 1800s. This invention was huge. It has changed the way that people are able to get from one point to another in an efficient manner. After several years, Henry Ford innovated mass production techniques. This will be discussed in more detail in a few moments. Mass production eventually led to Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, and they emerged as the big three auto companies in the 1920s. The automobile industry was big for military usage. The industry produced several million military vehicles, which were used during World War II. Fun fact, by the 1980s, 87.2% of American households owned at least one motor vehicle, and 55.5% owned more than one. Americans were said to have become dependent on automobiles. The Model T was introduced in 1908. The Model T was a 4-cylinder, 20-horsepower vehicle. It sold for $825. Henry Ford needed a large volume of Model Ts to be produced as quickly as possible. This was the start of the modern mass production. Ford created the well-known assembly line around 1913. This was the start of an even better era of mass production. Ships are a major part of transportation. They date back hundreds of thousands of years ago. The first ship was actually a raft. It was made by pieces of wood and strapped together. Your arms and legs would help paddle the raft. Sails and paddles were eventually invented. This was a major step in the way of transportation by sea. By 1400 to 1600, most ships were wooden built and sail-powered. The first steamboat came along in 1783. Propellers were invented in 1836. Another big advancement in ship transportation. During the 19th century, more and more steamboats were used to travel longer distances. By the 1900s, there were luxury liner ships developed. These were used as passenger ships. Then in 1956, the first container ship was launched. The cargo ship allowed larger amounts of goods to travel from one country to another. Trains are another major type of transportation. They are used to transport passengers as well as cargo. The first train appeared in 1804. It was able to haul approximately 25 tons of iron and ship about 70 people at a time. The trip was about 10 miles long. Trains eventually led to mass migrations, efficient city building, and efficient transportation of goods and capital. Can you believe that trains went from pulling very little cargo and very few passengers to transporting about 40% of the world's cargo? Airplanes have led to the most efficient method of transportation for people, resources, and the military. The first flight was conducted in 1903. This will be discussed in detail in a few minutes. In 1917, the first all-metal airplane was built. In 1933, Boeing introduced the first modern commercial airliner. In 1969 was a big year for Boeing. The well-known Boeing 747 took its first flight. The Boeing 747 is one of the most successful aircrafts that has ever been produced. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright successfully flew the first gasoline-powered, propeller-driven biplane. This took place in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The first flight lasted 12 seconds and flew a distance of 120 feet. The brothers also made 3 more attempts to fly that day. The last attempt covered 852 feet in 59 seconds. This was a huge accomplishment in transportation. This paved the way for the aviation industry that we know today. Looking at cars from the 20th century until now, things have changed tremendously. Early cars were basic. They didn't have air, heat, power windows, or radio. Slowly, cars started to include more and more features. By 2018, some cars even had a few autonomous features. A few of these features include lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, and self-braking systems. Tesla has created an autopilot system that serves as a great example of semi-autonomous cars. The cars have steering, stopping, and accelerating that are operated semi-independently. This means there still needs to be a driver behind the wheel because there will be times when the driver may need to take control. With so many neat features, it seems hard to think about cars becoming even better than they are now. The future of the automobile is fascinating. By 2021, they expect the first production of self-driving vehicles to be for sale. This is huge. That is less than 2 years away. Another advancement they are working on is vehicle-to-vehicle communication. This communication will allow cars to sense each other. If they are able to sense each other, they can help prevent wrecks and things of that nature. Ford has also been experimenting with LiDAR. LiDAR stands for Light Detection and Ranging. This works like sonar, but it uses light instead of sound waves. The Concept 26 design study is also something they are working on for the future. This demonstrates how a car's cabin will be configured to change depending on the driving mode. Imagine the capabilities while driving. We could read a book, watch a movie, or even connect to the internet while working. Ships have changed drastically in the last 50 years. One of the most recent experiments with ships is the usage of LNG, really LNG. LNG is liquefied natural gas. Currently, there are already more than 100 LNG-fueled ships globally. They are hoping to launch a cruise ship that can carry about 7,000 passengers with the use of LNG by 2022. If you take a look back, most ships were made of wood and simply had sails and oars. Ships are now made of things such as iron and aluminum. They also now have radars. navigation systems, and communication systems. These come in handy with the amount of traffic in the open waters. One of the main goals for the future of ships is to cut greenhouse gases by at least 50% by 2050. This seems like it might be difficult to accomplish. You may even be thinking, how in the world is this going to happen? Well, they are already working on it. A Japanese company by the name of Eco Marine Power has come up with a blueprint for the Aquarius EcoShip. This will be a cargo ship that is driven by a phalanx of rigid sails and solar panels. They believe the same system could also power oil tankers and cruise ships. They will have to have a backup system, but even with that, this ship could help cut emissions by 40%. NYK, a Japanese shipping line, also has a design for a new container ship. This ship will be known as the Super Eco Ship 2030. This ship will use LNG, the liquid natural gas, to make hydrogen to run fuel cells. It will be backed up by solar panels that cover the entire ship, as well as 4,000 square meters of sails to catch wind. Present-day trains are used mainly for the transportation of goods. Today, about 40% of the world's freight is transported by train. Many upgrades have been made to trains in the last decade. Trains are more dependable in particular areas and countries. The U.S. is behind when it comes to passenger trains. One interesting fact about the U.S. and trains is that in 1916, the U.S. had over 254,000 miles of railways. Now there are only 170,000 miles of railways. This shows that in the U.S., other methods of transportation became more favorable than trains. The future of trains doesn't seem to be as far advanced as the future of other means of transportation. While some countries have great success with passenger trains, other countries, such as the U.S., are not having great success with the passenger trains. Passenger trains would mean more railways, and more railways mean more time and money. There are so many changes that would need to be made in order to have a better future for trains in the U.S. One thing that has sparked an interest is magnetic levitation, or maglev trains. These trains would not have wheels. They would travel on superconducting magnetic rails. This idea is still being examined and tested, but hopefully this leads to a better future for trains. Within the last 20 years, there have been a lot of advancements. Present airplanes have in-flight entertainment. People are able to watch videos and TV while flying to their destinations. The seats have also changed. The seats used to be more spacious before the industry started adding more seats to planes to help accommodate more people. Now they are smaller and they don't have a lot of room layback. Although the seats seem to have taken a dive, some airplanes offer great first-class advancements for long flights. Most seats are able to be reclined and some even have beds. Present-day airplanes are also able to fly longer distances. 20 years ago, many stops had to be made to get from one country to another. Now there are flights that can travel the whole distance without having to stop. Another big advancement in planes was materials. Planes went from being made of wood to metal and now composites. Composites are advanced aerospace materials that allow manufacturers to design and build faster and lighter planes. The future of airplanes seems amazing. Air travel is a huge part of transportation. According to the IATA, air travel worldwide is expected to double to 8.2 billion travelers by the year 2037. A big issue with airplanes are CO2 emissions. The industry is hoping to reduce net CO2 emissions by 50% by the year 2050. Passenger biometrics are also in the works. They are testing the idea of using biometrics to help screen and identify passengers more quickly. This could eventually lead to shorter check-in wait times and shorter lines. Another look into the future for airplanes is the use of cockpit connectivity. Cockpit connectivity is the communication between what's going on in the cockpit and how the team on the ground is being affected by it. The use of cockpit connectivity will allow the on-ground team an advanced look at what is to come. They will be able to determine what decisions they will have to make when airplanes begin to land. Maintenance is a very important part of the airline industry. There are two major advancements that are being looked at and tested for future use. The first is drone maintenance. Aircraft maintenance inspections can take up to 6 hours to perform. Drones can improve inspection efficiency by allowing techs to be able to get a closer look at the aircraft. This will help them detect things faster. They also hope to use drones to deliver parts and to perform automated maintenance. Another major advancement is predictive maintenance. This will allow technicians to monitor engines and aircraft performance. The monitors will be called digital twins. They will be able to show engineers the status of the engine while in the air. This will help them be able to predict any issues that may need to be addressed. We want to thank you for viewing our Future Scanning Transportation screencast. We hope that you enjoyed it and that you were able to learn a few things about the transportation industry.